I'd like to thank the organiser for including me with such prestigious speakers, but they did give me a bit of a wrong steer. When I prepared this, I thought I was doing a public lecture. I turn up and all the people I bumped in the corridor know more about this than what I do. So I'm sorry, I'm going to skip the simplistic bits because I start off as basics. Basically, fertility preservation has done for two reasons. Obviously for medical reasons, that's to lay down misère, we should be doing for everybody, and for social reasons, which I'll talk about at the end, because that's where the media discussion will come. I've had an interest in fertility preservation for about 15 years. Kate Stern and I first wrote about reproductive aspects of cancer treatment. It was mainly sperm freezing in those days, and maybe some ovarian sparing, but it's something that's certainly exploded, and of course Debbie and Kate have done some great work up at the Women's in this area. There are really three options, as you probably all know: embryo cryopreservation, oocyte freezing, or in tissue preservation. I'm going to go through these fairly quickly because you know them. Embryo freezing, again, those of you who heard me speak a couple of weeks ago think I've joined the Alan Townsend fan club. But really, you can't talk about IVF and highlight the contributions Alan made. And the first freezing of a human embryo resulting in a human pregnancy, again, was Alan and Linda Moore. It's another area which Alan pioneered. It made the front page of the paper, another world first. We used to have one each week in those days. It was very exciting days. And we've been doing it for 30 years. We did it reasonably well. Success rates are reasonably predictable. I've got the latest figures from the MPSU report, which give you somewhere around about a 1 in 4, 1 in 5 chance of having a baby with a surviving single embryo transfer. So it works. But the problems are that some of these young women don't have a partner. So you can't freeze an embryo if you don't have any sperm. Often, there is not enough time to go through a stimulated cycle, even with clomiphene or with FSH. So it's just something that's not possible. If they've got something like breast cancer, which is itch and hormone sensitive, there's some concern about stimulating them fairly vigorously with FSH and bringing them into high level of itching in case it affects the cancer. Some of them don't respond well. We've learned sperm count in men goes down when they're stressed, and also women don't respond as well when they're stressed. And the other problem, of course, is that the embryo is made by two people and the relationship may not last. Oocyte preservation is much more attractive because it's autonomous. We just, again, stimulate the woman and freeze her eggs. And what has changed oocyte freezing, although not well enough yet in my opinion, which I'll talk about in a moment, there are over 2,000 births using vitrification. There's no abnormality, no increased abnormality in the offspring. It doesn't seem to increase abortion rate, so it's reasonably reassuring. And of course, it maintains autonomy. As I said, vitrification is really something that's made a lot of difference, made it far more successful. Now, I don't want you to read this. I just want to show you that I actually looked at the paper, and here's the summary, because this is the only bit you need to know. I just didn't want you to think I was making it up. So, as some or most of you will know, in Italy, embryo freezing was banned 20 years ago, something like that. So they had to freeze eggs. So they become the world leaders in egg freezing. And the group from Rome reported on their experience. Just look at the bottom line, or two bottom lines. They said they had a pregnancy rate of about 5.4% for each oocyte that was warmed, and a pregnancy rate per transfer of about 29-30%. So it's reasonably good, but nowhere near 100%. Now, how many do we have to freeze? I've gone through that paper, which I've skipped on, and basically I figured that if you started with 17 oocytes, 84% in the Rome series survived thawing, about half fertilised, and about 15% implanted. So my back of the envelope calculation across the board, regardless of age, is that if you want to have a baby, you need 17 eggs frozen. In fact, sorry, that's more than that. 17 of your eggs have to survive freezing. So it's probably 20 eggs or 22 eggs you need to have frozen. Anyway, it's better than what we had years ago. One of the other options is to use immature oocytes. Again, it's something Alan pioneered, Frank Barnes in 1994 at Monash. And unfortunately, it hasn't lived up to its promise. There are 2 units in the world which are quite successful, and one is the Char Clinic in Korea, and the other one's Montreal, SL Cancer Clinic in Montreal. But I think most other units have found it disappointing and don't actually do a lot of immature oocyte collection and freezing and things. So although it's an option, it's probably not an option I would recommend in Melbourne to someone I see tomorrow who needed fertility preservation. The beauty of it is that you can collect any time of the cycle. You don't have to use any stimulation, so there's nothing contraindicated. The problem is you don't get very many oocytes, and there's fairly low success rate for freezing and thawing. As I say, the pregnancy rates are not something to write home about, but they will probably improve with time. Ovarian tissue cryopreservation, and I must say that's something I'm quite excited about. I'm a bit like Alan, you can do this really cheap at the front end. Any gynaecologist with 2 arms and 2 hands can collect the tissue. Any IVF lab that can freeze embryos can freeze the tissue, and any gynaecologist can really transplant the tissue. It doesn't need a whole lot of skill, so it's a low skill thing. Jack Donaghy reported that case 10 years ago with a little bit of controversy about where the eggs actually came from, but now there are about 30 births around the world, and as you know, we had the first Australian birth of reimplanting some ovarian tissue into a woman who was had breast cancer, stored her ovarian tissue for about 6 years, and that's just the operation. Look, I'd put this in for the lay public. And so that's worked, and of course we read last September, about the success of the team of the women's, Debbie and Kate, who were the first pregnancy achieved from ovarian tissue, which took into the anterior abdominal wall. The problem is we know that the numerator is 30, we don't know what the denominator is, so we can't give success rates. There is a register being set up both internationally and Australia, and maybe sometime in the future we'll have results. The problem again is you're cutting away ovarian tissue, but if the woman's going to go through premature ovarian insufficiency anyway, you can be fairly generous with the ovarian tissue you take, so there should still be plenty of ovarian tissue there. Whether you get good follicles is some moot point, but certainly it does work some of the time. And the other problem, of course, is if you're putting ovarian tissue back in someone who's got a blood-borne cancer, then you might be able to, you might be reimplanting tissue, which you don't want to do. So to get around this again, and I think Alan postulated again about 20 odd years ago, what we could do is take some ovarian tissue and isolate the follicles in vitro, mature the oocytes in vitro, undertake ICSI, produce the embryo, just put the embryo back, so you're not putting ovarian tissue back. I guess this will be some years yet, but I'm sure it's a technique that will work one day and that avoids the risk of transferring tissue. Prepubertal girls, got his first name, Anderson in Edinburgh, sort of pioneered that, and they've been doing quite a lot of banking of ovarian tissue for prepubertal girls, and I'm sure this is really the only option for girls who aren't pubertal, and as many of these girls will do well with their chemotherapy, maintaining their fertility is important, and I think watch this space for this. Now let's get to the exciting bit, social egg freezing. The first article about this was by Gillian Lockwood, and a lot of you might know Gillian from the UK, she's in Birmingham. She was a philosopher. She's married to an ex-professor of philosophy, so she kind of got into it from a philosophical point of view and maintained betting for the young woman, or the not-so-young woman, who wants to preserve her fertility. And so now that frozen eggs are working reasonably well, that it's something that should be available. Now that's sort of kicked on since then, and I think we have now reached a brave new world where lots of people are asking about having their fertility preserved socially. Now, our friend Robert Winston, Lord Winston, came out, now this is some years ago, it was in 2009, and it's in the Daily Mail in the UK, and I just happened to be there, saying egg freezing gives false hope to women, and I think someone there says it's a con. Well, I think Robert probably spoke a little bit too strongly, or maybe was quoted a little bit out of context, but I think he makes a very valid point, that it's still early days, and the patients must not have their rose-coloured glasses on, like some of the clinicians do, and that they should be given all the right sort of results. There's a study done in the US published by Hirschfeld-Citron comparing cost effectiveness of freezing your eggs, freezing your tissue, or just waiting till you find Mr. Not Too Bad. And he said this analysis concluded that you might as well just wait on cost-benefit basis, just wait and see what happens. Now, I've already shown this slide. I reckon you need to freeze probably 20 to 22 eggs for one baby. And let's look at some examples. Octay, who has been a pioneer in this work, but to the best of my knowledge, Stab hasn't had any real success, hasn't had any deliveries, but he's done a lot of the early pioneering work with Gosden and people up in Leeds with Tony Rutherford. And he's actually he's marking it quite strongly, and he's actually produced what's called a estimator of success. So all you need to put in, whether it was slow freezing or vitrification, how old the woman was when she had the eggs frozen, and how many oocytes survived freezing, which is a bit hard to guess, and it gave the live birth probability. And that's what it looks like, and all get on the internet and play with it. I'd like to share 3 case histories with you as I finish up. About 6 weeks ago, I was visited by Mrs. A.B., no one's Mrs. these days. She was a very smart 44-year-old lawyer. Graduated, got the job she wanted, met a fellow lawyer in the firm. They were together for 9 years. He didn't want children. At 39, they separated. So 5 years have passed. She hasn't found anyone to have children with. So she thought at 44, she might like to preserve her fertility and wait for the right man to come along. So I put her into the prediction chart, and I was very generous. I said at 44 she'd have 6 eggs surviving, which is probably very generous, and that would give her about a 10% chance of having a baby. So she'd have to do 10 cycles of freezing to give her probability 1 of having a child, not to speak of a family. She wants 2 or 3 children. It's 20 or 30 cycles. Unrealistic. 40-year-old teacher. She always wanted children, but never actually had a relationship. Had some casual boyfriends, but no one she could have children with. And she feels now that she's 40, she doesn't want to do it on her own yet, she's not ready for that. But she knows the clock's ticking, and maybe she throws away some eggs now at 40, then in a few years' time when she's ready, if she hasn't found someone to have babies with, when she retires, she'll come use some donor sperm and have a baby. Her chance, again at 40, I gave her 5 oocytes, chance 13% having a baby. And the final one is probably the one that's most interesting. A very smart 29-year-old. She's actually the daughter of some people who are friends of mine, and she was going overseas. She'd never really had a serious boyfriend, never considered settled down with anyone. She was going to travel the world. She might be away 2, 3, 4, 5 years. And she was worried that when she came back to Australia, she'll be too old to find someone settled down and have a baby. So Mum and Dad said, for your 30th birthday, what about give you a cycle of egg freezing? So we put her into the calculator, and she had a bit better than 1 in 4 chance of that 1 egg freezing cycle giving her a baby. You'll be pleased to know, after our consultation, she took the money for the egg freezing for the overseas trip. And I haven't heard from her since. Now, if you get on the internet, it's a bit more depressing. There's a case history, a paediatrician, so she's no fool. Christy Manning did all her work, medical school training, board exams and things. So went to the age of 35, she went along to the California Pacific Fertility Centre in San Francisco, had 14 eggs removed and frozen for future use. So I guess she'll have about 10-15% chance of having a baby. Unfortunately, now this is what I'm not so excited about. This is an advertisement from Sydney, the Bondi Junction Clinic. Come along for a fertility assessment. We can give you donor sperm if you're single, but we also do egg freezing. And I think it's fairly likely that if you went and saw them and your AMH was low, you'd have an egg freeze cycle fairly soon. IVF has actually got a video promoting it on their website for egg freezing for social reasons. And but this is really looking very small because that's the size of the print on their webpage advertising it. It says the technique is relatively new, not possible to give price figures for chance of pregnancy after freezing. We know success rates for pregnancy using frozen sperm and frozen embryos are higher, but it doesn't actually give you any figures, doesn't talk about their experience, and I don't approve of this. VARTA, our own state regulator, has got a page on it, and again I think they need to update this. It talks about egg freezing, and then it goes down saying, what are my chances? Well, they quote a paper from Cato, which is nearly 10 years old, and we all know, well, most of us probably know Cato. I won't say any more than that. And then it says, one Australian clinic claims to have, with frozen eggs, a 70% post-thaw survival rate, a 60% fertilisation rate, and certain pregnancy rate of women under 37. So I think, it's a little bit too positive, and I think we need to have some proper facts. So I won't talk about males, because I haven't got time about that. I think they're very important, but very simple. Just stick it in the freezer. Before they have chemotherapy, or even before they have a vasectomy, it should be put on ice. Now, both Ellen and I grew up with Carl, and Carl had this very permissive attitude, Carl Wood that is, that we should let people, if things were reasonable, we should help people, let them do it. So I follow that, and I have no problem with women going ahead and having social egg freezing, social ovarian tissue freezing, if they are fully informed and are given proper success rates. What I'm worried about is that, I guess I agree with that, a little bit commercialism is not such a good thing. And often people have, both the clinicians and the women have the rose-coloured glasses on when they talk about fertility preservation for social reasons. For cancer, let's go flat out. If someone I saw needed, I'd go for embryo freezing if they had a partner, egg freezing, and ovarian tissue freezing. Cover the light, so one of them might work. So I'll finish there before I get bailed off. Thank you.